There's a specific kind of silence that only happens in sports. Not the silence of something going wrong, not the silence of a crowd holding its breath because someone got hurt or a ball hit the net at the wrong moment. This is a different silence entirely. It's the kind that falls when something happens that the human brain genuinely needs a full second to process. When reality shifts just slightly enough that every person in the room feels it at the same time, looks around to confirm that yes, everyone else felt it too, and then the noise comes, loud and sudden and completely uncontrollable. That silence happened on a Tuesday morning in June 2026, and the overwhelming majority of people watching tennis that day never saw it coming. A phone buzzed, a girl looked at a number on a screen, and then she cried. And what unfolded over the next 6 days would quietly become one of the most remarkable stories in the entire history of professional tennis. Not because of a trophy, not because of a final, but because of who showed up, where they came from, and what it cost them to be there. Here's the first thing you need to understand before any of this makes sense. This story doesn't begin at Wimbledon. It doesn't begin in London. It doesn't even begin in 2026. It begins 6 months earlier on a side court in Melbourne, where someone sitting in a scheduling office made a routine decision that they almost certainly think about differently now. Because that decision, completely ordinary at the time, completely logical on paper, quietly pulled the pin on something that would eventually detonate across the entire sport. Court 6 at the Australian Open holds exactly 1,500 people. It's what the tennis world calls an outside court, the kind of venue where you put first-round matches, the kind where the stands are maybe half full on a good day, where the crowd is quiet enough that you can actually hear the ball hit the strings from the back row, where the atmosphere is pleasant but contained. That's what the scheduling team expected when they slotted a first-round match onto Court 6 that January morning. That's what any reasonable person with access to the rankings and the historical data would have expected. A manageable crowd, a standard opening round atmosphere. What they got instead was something that nobody in Australian Open history had seen before and probably hadn't even imagined was possible. The line outside Court 6 that morning stretched hundreds of yards through Melbourne Park. People who had arrived 2 hours before the match couldn't get in. Security began closing the gates before the warm-up was finished. People who had been standing in January heat for over an hour, people who had traveled specifically for this match, were being turned away at the entrance while the court itself was already beyond its limit. And here's the part that tells you everything you need to know about what was actually happening. The people who couldn't get inside didn't leave. They stood in the walkways, they pressed up against the fences, they found angles and gaps in any position that gave them a sight line to the court. And when Alex won a point, the noise coming from outside the venue was louder than the noise coming from inside. 101,696 people attended the Australian Open that day. That number is not a typo. It was the highest single-day attendance figure in the tournament's entire history, and an extraordinary portion of those people were there for one specific reason: a 21-year-old from Quezon City whose name most of the tennis establishment had only recently learned to pronounce correctly. Britain's Billie Jean King Cup captain was in the stands, watching. She went on BBC Radio 5 Live afterward and said something that instantly went everywhere because it perfectly captured the exact second the tennis world first began to understand the scale of what it was dealing with. She said, and I want you to actually hear this, she said, "I couldn't believe the cues. Who's on the scheduling team?" That quote landed the way it did because it wasn't really about the scheduling. It was about the realization embedded in the question. The realization that the people running one of the world's biggest tennis tournaments had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Not about Alexandra Eala's game, about Alexandra Eala's gravity. But here's where most people skip ahead, and if you skip this part, you genuinely miss the whole thing. Because the story of what happened at Court 6 that morning isn't really a tennis story. It's a story about 60,000 people. Melbourne has a Filipino community of approximately 60,000 people. 60,000 individuals who left the Philippines, crossed an ocean, rebuilt entire lives in a city that wasn't theirs, and made it home anyway. And on that Tuesday morning in January, it felt like a substantial portion of them had all independently, without any organized campaign, without any celebrity endorsement, without any promotional infrastructure of any kind, simply decided to show up because she was playing, because she was one of them. And this is the part that takes a minute to fully land, because the scale of it is easy to say and hard to actually absorb. There are 13 million overseas Filipinos scattered across the planet right now. 13 million. They are nurses working night shifts in Birmingham hospitals. They are engineers in Melbourne writing code at 7 in the morning. They are seafarers on cargo ships in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, timing their shore leave around match schedules. There are domestic workers in Dubai watching live streams on their phones during 15-minute breaks. There are students in Edinburgh who have been quietly saving since January, calculating whether they can afford the flight if she goes deep enough. And for many of them, not all, but many, one of the deepest and most persistent aches of living overseas is the distance from something that feels like you. Something that says, without announcing it, without making a speech about it, we see you. We know who you are. You are not invisible here. And then Alex started winning. And suddenly, Filipino nurses in London were texting Filipino engineers in Melbourne at midnight about a second set tiebreak. Watch parties that started with 5 people were ending with 50. Group chats that had been dormant for months were suddenly going off every match, every point, every game. And none of it was manufactured. None of it was organized by a marketing department or fueled by an influencer campaign or built by a brand team with a content calendar. It was recognition. The specific, instant, completely unmanufactured kind of recognition that bypasses logic entirely and goes straight to something older and deeper. Alex described it herself in that plain and completely unperformed way she has of talking. She said, "The Filipinos, we have such a strong sense of community. I feel like when one of us does well, we all have that shared sense of pride." Say that slowly. One of us. All of us. That's not a press conference answer, that's an identity statement. That's millions of people hearing their own interior experience spoken back to them by a 21-year-old standing on a tennis court. And the tennis world, which runs on metrics and demographics and market research and viewership data, had absolutely no framework for it. They kept watching it happen week after week and couldn't categorize what they were seeing. Indian Wells, hundreds of fans in Alexandra Eala fan club shirts, queuing for hours to watch practice sessions, not matches, practice, just to see her hit balls in an empty court at 10 in the morning. Dubai tournament officials stating publicly, "It's a very big community and we are creating loyalty among fans." Rome, same story, different city, different crowd, different flags, same outcome. And always the same pattern. Organizers anticipate 60% capacity, Alex gets placed on an outside court, and thousands of people show up and there is suddenly nowhere to put them. By the time a Wimbledon came around, some tournament directors had started quietly adjusting their court assignments, but not all of them had fully processed what was about to happen, because this time was different. This time had a number attached to it that changed the entire conversation. Now, here's where the story becomes genuinely difficult to believe unless you follow tennis closely enough to understand what the numbers actually mean. June 22nd, 2026, 6 in the morning. The WTA rankings update drops, and Alexandra Eala picks up her phone and sees 30. World number 30. She had jumped 5 spots in a single week. And 5 spots in 1 week doesn't just happen. It's not a clerical adjustment or a quirk of the system. You have to do something to earn it. And what she had done the week before in Berlin was something the tennis world significantly underreacted to. In the semifinals of the WTA 500 Berlin Open, she beat Elena Rybakina, world number 2. Then she turned around in the same tournament and beat Elena Svitolina, world number 8, back-to-back, same week. That's not a lucky draw or a favorable bracket. Those are two of the most dangerous players on the planet beaten in consecutive matches by a 21-year-old who, when told afterward that she'd just cracked the top 30 for the first time, responded with the specific kind of quiet that comes from someone who has been working towards something for so long that when the door finally opens, they almost can't trust it. But then her phone buzzed again. And this detail, this one small piece of information that arrived on the back of everything else, is the detail that makes the rest of the story possible. Victoria Maboko, world number 9, Canadian, Wimbledon contender. Left knee, withdrawal. And with that one announcement, Alex didn't just move to number 30, she moved to 29. And 29 meant seeded, and seeded meant that for the first time in the entire history of the Open era, in nearly 60 years of professional Grand Slam tennis, a Filipino player would have their name in the seeded column of a major. Not one player before her, not one match, not one tournament, not one round. Never. Until now. Stop and actually feel what that means for a second, because it's easy to read past it. A seed at a Grand Slam is not just a number next to your name in a draw sheet. It is the tournament saying, structurally, officially, in a way that cannot be argued with, you belong here. You will not face the best players in the world until the later rounds. You have protection. You have a path. And when the WTA made that official, when the announcement went out and the word seeded appeared next to her name for the first time in history, tennis Twitter went silent for approximately 4 seconds, and then it erupted. And the Filipino diaspora did not celebrate quietly. People were booking flights before they'd finished reading the announcement. Group chats that had already been loud went completely deafening. And here is what you have to understand about who these people are and what those flights actually represent. These were not wealthy tourists with flexible schedules and open calendars and the kind of financial cushion that makes a last-minute transatlantic booking feel like a minor inconvenience. The nurse in Birmingham who booked her ticket that morning had been working double shifts for 3 weeks. The caregiver in Rome who rearranged her entire holiday schedule to make the dates work hadn't taken a full day off in 2 years. The seafarers who had been timing their shore leave around the Wimbledon draw since the Berlin results came in had planned their logistics with the kind of precision that military operations require. These are people for whom a flight to London is not casual, it is a decision. It requires negotiation and sacrifice and planning and trade-offs that most people in the tennis world booking hospitality boxes would never have to make. And they made it immediately, without hesitation, because this was Alex, because this had never happened before, and because they were not going to miss it. But underneath all of this, underneath the celebration and the ticket sales and the emergency scheduling meetings that tournament directors were suddenly holding, there was a question that nobody was quite asking out loud yet. The question that was sitting just below the surface of everything. What actually happens if she goes deep? What happens when the crowds that overwhelmed Melbourne and Dubai and Rome show up at Wimbledon and she wins a match and then another after that? What happens when this stops being a story about a seeding and becomes a story about a run? Because people were starting to notice, and not just fans. Coco Gauff, world number 4, Grand Slam champion, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet and unquestionably one of the biggest names in women's tennis, when someone asked her who would be the #1 jersey seller if tennis worked like the NFL or the NBA, if players had their names on the back of shirts and the market decided who mattered most, she didn't pause, she didn't hedge, she didn't say, oh, it's hard to say, or offer 3 names with a diplomatic, any of them really. She said Alex. She said Alex would probably be #1, and then she added, she has a huge fan base. Think about what Coco Gauff is actually saying in that moment. She is a Grand Slam champion with millions of followers telling you that the 29th ranked player in the world would outsell her on merchandise. That is not a polite compliment. That is a significant admission about how fan loyalty actually works, about what it means when a community isn't just passively following someone, but is deeply, personally, almost ferociously invested in them. Former pros on the Nothing Major podcast got into it properly, which is where it got really interesting. Someone asked the question that everyone in the tennis world had been carefully tiptoeing around for months. Is Alex the biggest draw in women's tennis right now? Not the best player, the biggest draw. Bigger than Sabalenka? Bigger than Coco? And the answer, after a moment that said everything about how strange this felt to say out loud, was yes. And then someone brought up the number that made even the most skeptical tennis insiders pause when they heard it. At the Australian Open, Alexandra Eala held a standard pre-tournament press conference, the kind that gets scheduled into a small room and streamed online, and usually picks up a few thousand views from the most engaged section of the tennis fanbase. Carlos Alcaraz, reigning Wimbledon champion, had 29,000 viewers. Aryna Sabalenka, world number 1, had 9,000. Alexandra Eala, ranked outside the top 30 at the time, had 171,000. 171,000 people watched a press conference. Not a match, not a highlight reel, a press conference. She had 19 times more live viewers than the world number 1. When those numbers crossed the desks of the right people at the WTA, something shifted. Because there is a difference between knowing that a player has a passionate following and watching data completely obliterate your entire model of what popularity means inside your sport. And this is the part that makes Alexandra Eala genuinely different from every other player generating noise right now. She didn't build any of this. She's not managing her cultural impact with a team of strategists. She's not calculating her positioning or running a brand playbook or making decisions based on what plays well in certain markets. When she found out about those press conference numbers, about 171,000 people tuning in to watch her answer questions in a small room, she said something that I think is worth sitting with. She said, "I'm nowhere near the leagues of course, the greats." And she genuinely meant it. That is not performed modesty. That is not a media-trained answer designed to seem humble while quietly knowing exactly what the numbers say. She is a 21-year-old from Quezon City who started hitting tennis balls as a kid and has spent her entire career doing the work, the actual grinding, unglamorous, anonymous work of becoming better. And the response to that work has grown into something that neither she nor anyone around her fully expected or planned for. And that's exactly why it lands the way it does. When you watch her on court, you are not watching a celebrity managing an image. You are not watching someone who has been carefully constructed for maximum relatability. You are watching someone who desperately, visibly, quietly wants to win. Someone who carries the weight of an entire nation's hope, not with speeches or theatrics, but with her jaw set and her eyes fixed and her body doing something that took thousands of hours to learn. And the Filipinos watching her on their phones during night shifts, in cramped living rooms in Dubai, in the stands with their flags pressed up against the barriers, they feel that. They feel it because they recognize it, because that same quiet, relentless, uncomplaining determination, that refusal to make a fuss about what it costs, is exactly what took them across the ocean in the first place. She's playing for herself, but she feels like all of them. And this loop, this specific and completely unplanned feedback loop, is what nobody in professional tennis had built any infrastructure to handle. She plays better when they're there. The noise in Melbourne pushed her through tight moments she might have dropped in a quieter building. The flags in Indian Wells reminded her in the third set why she was still fighting. The crowds in Rome made her feel, in her own words, unstoppable. And that feeds back into her game, and she wins more, and she climbs the rankings, and more Filipinos cross oceans, and the loop accelerates, and no algorithm anticipated it. No draw committee had a protocol for it. No court scheduling system in the history of professional tennis was designed to handle thousands of people showing up for someone ranked 29th in the world as though she were already the champion. And now she was walking into Wimbledon, seated, protected, with a path that no Filipino player had ever had before, and thousands of people already in London who had moved their entire lives around to be there. Nurses and engineers and seafarers and students and caregivers, all of them operating on something that isn't certainty. That is the thing that stops me every time I come back to the story. These people did not book flights because she had won, they booked flights because she might. think about the faith that lives inside that sentence. Think about the money spent and the double shifts worked and the holidays rearranged and the childcare sorted and the days off negotiated with managers who may or may not have fully understood why this particular week mattered so much. All of it built not on a guarantee, not on a trophy already sitting on a shelf, but on a belief. A belief that one of their own was standing at the edge of something that had never happened before in 60 years of professional tennis history, and that they needed to be in the room when it did. If it did. When it did. And that distinction between if and when is where you find out what hope is actually made of when it's real. Real hope costs something. Real hope means you put something on the line with no guarantee of return. Every ticket purchased was a bet. Every flight booked was a declaration. Every flag folded carefully into a suitcase was a statement that said, "We believe in her. We were here before she made it, and we will be here when she does." Wimbledon 2026. The grass is freshly cut. That specific, almost unreal shade of green that only exists on the All England club courts in the first week of the tournament, before the baselines start to wear. The tournament directors are in emergency meetings about court assignments, cross-referencing the draw with crowd projections in a way that would have seemed completely unnecessary 2 years ago. Hospitality teams are being briefed, security protocols are being reviewed, because nobody, absolutely nobody with any memory of Melbourne wants to be the person who put Alexandra Eala on an outside court when thousands of Filipinos were already in London, and more were landing at Heathrow every hour. The draw is set. The seed is real. The path is open in a way it has never been open before. And somewhere in a hotel room in SW19, a 21-year-old from Quezon City is sitting quietly, probably not sleeping as well as she'd like, thinking about a first-round match that, for her, is just tennis. The same tennis she has been playing since she was a child. The same mechanics, the same patterns, the same discipline. Just tennis. But for 13 million people scattered across every time zone on the planet, it is something that doesn't have a word for it yet. Something between pride and prayer. Something between watching and actually willing it into existence through sheer collective force of wanting. She walks out of the tunnel, and they roar. And in that sound, that single, enormous, completely spontaneous eruption of noise that fills every corner of the ground, you can hear everyone who stood outside Court 6 in Melbourne because the gates had already closed. You can hear the group chats lighting up simultaneously in Dubai, in Birmingham, in Edinburgh, in Rome. You can hear 60 years of Grand Slam history that didn't have a Filipino name anywhere in it. And one girl from Quezon City, 21 years old, the first Filipino seed in Grand Slam history, standing on the grass at Wimbledon. She hears it too, and she already knows. She already knows what this is. She already knows what it means and where it comes from and how much it cost. This is what it was all for. Every early morning, every quiet loss that nobody watched, every court session in every city that wasn't home, every moment of doing the work when the work felt invisible. This is what it was all for. And it's only just beginning.